Highguard is no more. It doesn't feel that long ago that the game was first revealed at the Game Awards, and now after suffering declining player counts, a number of layoffs, and several controversies along the way, the game is shutting down 45 days after it first launched. So very quickly, Wildlight Entertainment, the developers behind Highguard, went online to say, "We have made the decision to permanently shut down Highguard on March 12th. Since launch, more than 2 million players stepped into Highguard's world. We have not been able to build a sustainable player base to support the game long term. Servers will remain online until March 12th. The team is excited to release one final game update to enjoy in the remaining life of the game. We'll be adding a new warden, a new weapon, account level progression, and skill trees. From all of us at Wildlight, thank you for playing." And looking at the Steam charts themselves, you could clearly see that this was a long time coming. Like, the player counts themselves, it's just not a sustainable number to have for a live service game. But I mean, how did we even get here in the first place? Well, I think it all breaks down to a couple of key factors.
Welcome to Highguard.
Instead of making Titanfall, we're making this shit!
He said Titanfall. That did not look like Titanfall.
The game has gone completely radio silent since its announcement.
We're starting to hear murmuring from content creators who were flown out to play the game.
It's sort of a weird mix of genres.
The game is just so damn boring. Massive burst of interest, and then it has dropped off a cliff.
Unfortunately, along with most of the team at Wildlight, I was laid off today.
They've just laid off the majority of their staff.
This is lightning in a bottle. I could play this game all day. God, it hurts.
And now we're finding out that Tencent quietly funded Highguard as this game is falling apart.
They are shutting it down.
The first is gameplay. Now, to Wildlight's credit, there have been a few updates and changes added to the game since launch. They've added things like new weapons, new characters, the 5v5 mode, a couple of limited time events, and more. So, just as the game is getting shut down, I decided to jump back in one last time to see what the game is like before it's gone for good. Right out the gate, the tutorial is still a mandatory step for new players, so you spend roughly 15 minutes learning all the basics before heading into the main game itself. Surprisingly enough, it is still possible to find a match in Highguard, when you enable crossplay, that is. And even then, you gotta be persistent with it, especially if you want to play 5v5. Even with more players on the field, the overall flow of the game still feels, well, kind of all over the place. You're not spending as much time in the base now, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that the first half of the game feels very empty. You're spending the majority of the time in this game running around, fighting your teammates for loot, and mining crystals to pass the time. Even with 5 players, the map still feels too big and empty. There's not really a lot of interesting POIs. One side of the map feels the same as the other, really. And when it actually gets to the shield breaker phase, which is basically capture the flag, and you finally get into a gunfight, it's kind of short-lived as you're incentivized to make a mad dash towards the enemy base. I will say though that the raiding is the best part of the entire game, hands down. It's just annoying that it takes so long to get there, and it's very clear that these bases are not made for 5v5, as the majority of sites are simply far too small and fights get way too chaotic. It's such a weird problem to have, right? The map itself is too big, yet the bases are kinda small. They also added this new skill tree in the game where you can unlock perks such as taking reduced damage when planting a bomb, or perhaps carrying more rocket launcher ammo. A lot of these abilities aren't very exciting, to be honest. And I mean, the game is being shut down anyway, but I think this would have given veteran players a major advantage over new players, so I'm not sure how this would have panned out for the long-term health of the game if it was still running. They also added 2 new wardens to this game. One transforms into a wolf that hunts down enemies, and the other basically provides shields to allies. And if you ask me, these guys are kind of the best looking characters by far. Yet it does little to change the fact that the majority of the roster looks mediocre. Overall, the gameplay still feels lacking despite all the changes they've added since launch. The second is strategy, and I think we can all agree that there have been a few odd choices made by the developers here. I mean, the fact that they had to lay off their staff literally weeks after the game first launched, and that they're even closing down the game not even 2 months into the game's lifespan, it just baffles me that they didn't have any sort of runway or a safety net in place. When the game releases, no one knows for certain whether a game will succeed succeed. You can anticipate that it may go either way based on impressions online, but it does end up feeling like a dice roll most of the time. This speaks to me like a pure gamble, a bloody Hail Mary where it's all or nothing. And if it doesn't become a global sensation from the get-go, wrap it up. Now, the theory online is that because they were supposedly receiving Tencent money, which by the way kind of goes against the whole indie facade they had going on, when the game failed to reach certain internal milestones, say X amount of revenue generated or X amount of players at a certain point, Tencent basically backed out, and with virtually no money going into the game, they were basically running on fumes and needed to immediately downscale. And it's really puzzling that they had this entire 1-year roadmap, and now none of this will ever see the light of day. This just speaks of a catastrophic mismanagement first of all, but also just misreading the room entirely. And that leads on to my next point. They wanted to make a new kind of shooter game. While it may have been a bit of a Frankenstein of game mechanics from other titles, it's still unique in its premise. The execution just left a lot to be desired. When you've got a big multiplayer idea, it only makes sense to check whether there's actual demand for a shooter like this. But they developed the game in secret for years, and even right up until launch, they kept everything close to their chest. I just don't understand why. Sure, they ran some tests internally beforehand, and Jeff Keighley certainly liked it enough, but that's still sampling a very tiny slice of a gaming community that has millions of players every single year. When your game is free to play, the goal is to get as many people through that door as possible. A few internal tests just aren't gonna give you reliable insights. People can have niche tastes and unpopular opinions. It's just not a good way to gauge whether a game will appeal to a wider audience. We have seen so many games succeed because they got players involved from the get-go. Baldur's Gate 3 remains as a popular RPG to this day, Battlefield Labs got players involved during development, and Battlefield 6 released to major success, and Valve's upcoming game Deadlock also gets players involved at every turn. But with Highguard, they chose to bury themselves in their own hype. They had lightning in a bottle. They wouldn't fail. Their own test said that the game was good. If they had just gotten players involved sooner, maybe Highguard could have shaped up to be something more focused in its vision, with a design and style that's more unique and appealing, and maybe Highguard would still be around. But when you go on to fire the majority of your staff, it really doesn't inspire a lot of confidence for a potential comeback, so they stop playing the game. Any microtransaction loses what little value they have left, and they move on to something else. Now, the third reason is a bit more specific, and it all has to do with the Game Awards. The thing that started it all, and people are basically in two different groups when it comes to how they feel the Game Awards actually impacted Highguard. One believes that Jeff Keighley basically set the game up for failure. They overhyped, overpromised, and basically presented the game in a light that it could never really hope to live up to. Not only did he give the game his golden seal of approval, but he did so in a show that had the Divinity and the Knights of the Old Republic reveal. But on the other hand, it could be argued that the Game Awards was the lifeline to Highguard. That the only reason that it ever had a 100,000 concurrent peak on Steam and ever reached 2 million players in the first place was because of its spotlight, because of its appearance at the Game Awards. I mean, the original plan for Highguard was to shadow drop it, right? And if the game originally launched as it were without Jeff Keighley stepping in, it's very likely that they wouldn't have ever reached that sort of peak in the first place and would still be struggling to find an audience from the get-go. If you ask me, I think it's a little bit of both. The fact remains is that they were given a golden opportunity that only an idiot would refuse. They were the showstopper, where interest is at its peak as people want to know, well, what game of the year is. Even if everybody knew it was Expedition 33. We all know the saying, right? With great power comes great responsibility. If one of the biggest gaming platforms out there is hyping up the game and the game fails to match that expectation, that fault doesn't really lie with the show, but rather the game itself most of the time. They had every perk imaginable, and what they came out with was a trailer that looked generic, failed to properly explain what the game was about, and relied purely on the goodwill that came from previous games. It really did not have a great first impression, and so you have this confusion and this disappointment that was just left to fester for an entire month without a word from developers. And then they released everything at once: press and content creator impressions, explainer videos, trailers. But why bother to go through all of that when a player can just jump into the game for free, by the way, and see for themselves? And they did. And the game was simply not good enough to convince people to stay on board. In fact, these past few weeks have seen more people talking about the game than actually playing Highguard. And the last one is timing. I mean, this game was made with the success of Apex Legends and the reputation of Titanfall in mind. But having said that, the gaming scene in general has changed a lot in the past 10, heck even past 5 years. Every gaming company out there has been pushing out live services left and right, and it's gotten to the point where the gaming space has been littered with mediocre to bad titles. Some have gone as far as ruining the reputation of once revered studios, and it's simply because live service is simply too lucrative. So it's worth just regurgitating live service over and over again just to see what sticks, because if one did succeed, that alone will be enough to make up for all the other failures. So people are already going into this game with fairly low expectations, which wasn't improved at all by the month-long silence afterwards. And not only that, people already have their forever live service games. Valorant, Arc Raiders, Apex Legends, these are the games Highguard was competing with. The experience you bring to the table has to be so incredible, so exceptional, that it steals players away from these games and makes them commit to yours. Which, as we saw with the Steam charts, people tried it, they didn't like it, and they moved back to their own original games that they already spent so much time and money into. And it's not to say we haven't seen new live service games absolutely pop off in the last few years. There have been new titles out there that have been able to go toe-to-toe with some of the longest running franchises out there, but Highguard was simply not one of them. Even though it's heading to the grave, and after playing the game for a little bit, I can say that there are some improvements made to Highguard, but as they say in the industry, it's a matter of too little too late. People have already moved on. Now, leading up to the game's launch and even afterwards, there was the whole narrative of whether or not Highguard would become Concord 2. But from the few players that remained with the game from day one, there was also this small, teeny tiny hope of whether or not it would make a No Man's Sky-like comeback. Heck, Rainbow Six Siege didn't exactly release to stellar results when it first launched, but after releasing multiple updates over the years, it eventually grew back to become the major global sensation that it's become today. Overwatch's reputation has been through the gutter over the years, but since the launch of Overwatch Season 1, I wouldn't say it's exactly overshadowed the whole cancelled PvE thing, but people are starting to look at the game a lot more favorably. Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077, heck, even Fortnite started off as a failed PvE project. I could really go on. But the devil is in the details, right? A lot of these games had either AAA backing or they had sold a lot of copies despite being a major disappointment in the eyes of the gaming community. Highguard had none of these benefits. The fact that they are shutting down the game this early on doesn't really speak to me as a move made from a lack of faith in the game necessarily, but rather one made from necessity, that they just simply can't support the game anymore because there's not enough cash flow. And in the end, Highguard became a game with grand ambitions that it just couldn't really live up to. And the only benefit that can come out of this whole entire fiasco is the hope that other games will take it as a lesson that they need to step it up a little bit. Honestly, I was just surprised I was even able to find a couple of games before the game was shuttered for good, but hey, Highguard is just the gift that keeps on giving even as it's being buried for good. It started with welcome, but now we gotta say goodbye to Highguard. Thank you for watching and take care.